All right, welcome back to the Freight Podcast. My name is Austin Gregory, and I'm your host. As always, thank you for listening. And this week we are diving again into our Daniel series. Now, the Daniel series, we're going through the book of Daniel, so you can read along with us as you go. But essentially, I haven't taught the Bible in a little bit. I want to get back into teaching the Bible more and more and kind of work out that muscle. And so this is a way for me to do that and for you guys to hopefully get something out of it. But this week we are in our second episode of the series, and we are going to still be in chapter 1. Last time we talked, we dived a little bit into the context, just set the story up, set the pages up for the series. This week we're going to dive into the story in the beginning and see a little bit of how Daniel and his friends are going to be integrated into this new society. So, to start off, I just want to set the context of the story. And so I want to answer this question of what are Daniel and his friends doing in Babylon. Now, from the last episode, if you remember, Babylon has came in and they have taken the best Israel has to offer from Jerusalem, and this includes Daniel, his friends, and a bunch of other Hebrew boys who are kind of the top ranking of their world, and they're teenage boys, and Babylon has taken these Hebrew boys from their homeland and brought them to Babylon, and the goal is to retrain them in the ways of Babylon, give them a new identity. So last time we seen that they each received new names, and their Babylonian names, and the goal is for them to have a new identity in the ways of Babylon, and that this retraining these Hebrew boys who are the top of the top for Israel will trickle down in effect to the rest of Israel as they are being brought in under Babylonian rule. So that's the context of the story. Now, the next thing I want to do is I want to define some terms before we get too deep. The reason we define terms is simply because language is complicated, and sometimes the words we hear make us think of something that maybe the author or the person speaking did not intend for you to hear them in that certain way, right? Sometimes we use words and we're using them in a different way, and we have a different meaning behind them than what the person we're speaking to is interpreting it as. And so to define some terms really quick, I want to define two words: assimilation and Babylon. Assimilation is a word you may have heard. It is a word that's going to come up in our political landscape today, and that's not a word you got to be afraid of. It's not some woke word. It's not a word that conservatives use to weaponize. Like, yes, that does happen, but in the context of the story, it's just a very simple way of explaining that this process Daniel and his friends are about to go through is going to be this process of assimilation. And all assimilation means is it's the process of adopting another culture's views, customs, and culture as your own. And so Daniel and his friends are going to be adopting the Babylonian ways and customs, or at least they're going through this process so that they can. And typically you see this in cultures where you have a majority culture and you have a minority culture. And the majority culture expects the minority culture to kind of assimilate or adopt its customs and cultures. And so you can see this as, I'm just going to use an example. If there's a black hood kid going to a all-white private school, the expectation is for that kid, that black hood kid, to assimilate into the ways and customs of this all-white private school. And that's a very stark example, but I think it paints an example that you'd very quickly grab onto. You're going to see this in the conversations about immigration right now going on, of people maybe more on the right are annoyed or frustrated that some of the immigrants that are coming in are not assimilating into to our culture, our way of doing things as Americans. But then there's also a whole other conversation in that, and we're not diving into that. That's not the point of this series. But those are kind of two ways. Maybe you'll see it in our context today. In Daniel's context, Daniel would be in that minority culture, and he would be going through the process of assimilating into the majority culture, which is Babylon. Now, the other term I want to define is Babylon, which may be a weird one because it's not a word like assimilation. Right? You're not going to read assimilation in the Bible. Partly why I had to define it. But Babylon, you're going to find all throughout your Bible, and it's a word that's very important because it's actually a character in the Bible. So Babylon is the empire of this world. It's going to be a character throughout the pages of Scripture. Egypt maybe was early on, and then you'll see Babylon start peeking its head in and out every now and then. In the book of Daniel, Babylon is very prevalent because that's the culture, that's the evil empire in that story. And then in Revelation, you're also going to see it pop up some more. And in that story, or in the book of Revelation, Babylon is a character that they are using the name Babylon to refer to an actual evil empire in the time period that the book of Revelation was being written. So it's a character that's very important throughout the pages of Scripture, but it's the empire of this world, typically the evil empire of this world. And I actually got this from the book, it's called Revelation for the Rest of Us by Scott McKnight and Cody Matchett. Fantastic book. But he, in it, sets up the book of Revelation, and he kind of does it as a play. And in it, he has the playbill of Revelation. And so I'm going to read the computer just went off. I'm going to read the description for the character of Babylon that I think is going to help us to kind of understand who this character is. It says, the mission is to embody the way of the dragon. It's Babylon's mission. Rides on the wild thing, characterized by royalty, idolatry, opulence, murder, status, arrogance, power, military might, murder again, and economic exploitation. Kills those in the way of the Lamb, gathers under her power the kings of the earth, merchants of the world, and sea captains, serves as a timeless metaphor for empire and injustices and idolatry. In John's day, Babylon is Rome. Babylon falls, and it's also known as a great prostitute. So, very stark words, very eye-catching words to describe who Babylon is. But again, Babylon's the evil empire of this world. That's what you mainly need to know. Now, what I want to do now is I want to kind of go into the text breakdown of this chapter and the rest of the chapter in the book of Daniel. And so the first thing is, how does Babylon try to assimilate Daniel and his friends? The first thing that we seen last week was they give him a new identity. They give him a new name. You're no longer going to identify Daniel and his friends as people who love God, people under the way of God, people living in the city of God. Instead, you're going to define them by what the Babylonians will define them as. That's their new identity. That's their goal, is to be the great Babylonians. Now, with that, they're also going to change their eating habits. And so, early on, you'll see in the book of Daniel, Daniel and his friends are giving access to the king's royal table. And so they're going to eat the king's food. And the difference between Babylonians and Israelites is Babylonians are not kosher. Right? Their dietary restrictions are different. They have different customs on how they eat and what they eat. And Daniel and his friends are coming into this world knowing, okay, we got a challenge immediately. We can't eat the same food you guys eat. And so, the second point is, how does Daniel and his friends respond to this point of assimilation? How do they respond to being told, hey, now you're going to eat like the Babylonians do? Well, first is in verse 5. I'm going to read verse 5. It says, and I'm reading this out of the CSB. The king assigned them daily provisions from the royal food and from the wine that he drank. They were to be trained for 3 years, and at the end of that time, they were to attend the king. Now, we see that the way in which the king was going to retrain these Hebrews is by first giving them that new identity, by renaming them, and by two, giving them access to the best food Babylon has to offer. So the assimilation begins by re-identifying who you are in this pagan system, and then by starting the next change, and then by starting the next change by changing your eating habits, what you're going to eat, in order to align with the culture. Verse 8, though, then goes on, Daniel determined that he would not defile himself with the king's food or the wine he drank, so he asked permission from the chief eunuch not to defile himself. Daniel determined that he would not defile himself with the king's food. That's key. Daniel immediately has a line of conviction that he's drawing in the sand, saying, okay, I'm not going to do this thing you're asking me to do, or not even asking, that you're instructing me to do, right? Meaning Daniel's drawn a line based on his conviction that he has. His commitment to God usurps whatever commitment he has to this new king. You'll see throughout the pages of Daniel and his friends, they will exist within the system of this Babylonian government. They will fall in line to a degree. But it's important. They're going to do it to a degree. And so this is a key note you have to make. There will be times as we exist in this Babylon type system, we're existing in the world system, in the way of the world, where we will draw lines, and there's times where we're going to say, okay, that's not that big of a deal. I'm going to just kind of fall in line, and I'll work from there. It's important to have that distinction. You don't always fall in line. You also don't always buck the system. There's a balance there that you have to figure out. And it's not even a balance. It's more like a tension that you're going to have to figure out. In verse 12, I'm going to read that. It says, Daniel says, please test your servants for 10 days. Let us be given vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then examine our appearance and the appearance of the young men who are eating the king's food, and deal with your servants based on what you see. So Daniel has a conviction. He draws his line in the sand. He then expresses his conviction that he doesn't want to defile himself to the chief eunuch. And then when the chief eunuch responds with like, you're going to get me in trouble if this goes poorly, Daniel says, no, put me and my boys on the line. All right? We're willing to lay our lives down for this. So put us on the line, test us, and see if what we do is better than what you guys are offering. And if it is, that's going to be better for you in the long run. It's weird because Daniel he's separating himself from the Babylonians, but he's also doing it in a way that's going to better the Babylonians by saying, hey, I've actually got a better way for you guys to eat, and it's going to actually offer better results for you long term if we're going to be in Babylon. Crazy. So the next question I want to answer is, where is God in all of this? The point of Scripture is not for us to just take moral lessons or pep talks or anything like that. They're critical that we understand these are stories, yes, but they are also stories of people and cultures and these groups of people throughout time and history going through real life situations or stories that are reflecting real life situations and showing how God moves throughout them. And it's not always going to be explicit. It's not going to say, hey, God showed up here. Sometimes you're going to look at the hidden details underneath. And so in verse 9, you see it says, God had granted Daniel kindness and compassion from the chief eunuch. God is using his providence to help offer favor to Daniel and his friends to keep moving forward, right? And he's going to do that by letting the chief eunuch look favorably upon Daniel and his friends. In verse 17, it says, God gave these 4 young men knowledge and understanding and every kind of literature and wisdom. He lets this test that Daniel and his friends are going to have to go through, he lets it pay off in the end. It works. I got hiccups. But it works. And so that's God divinely working through this, the behind the scenes, and orchestrating things in a way to where Daniel and his friends are able to keep moving through Babylon in a productive manner. This next section I want to tackle is, what are fears that we may have about living in Babylon? Now, I think the main fear any of us will have as we are Christians, we're trying to follow the way of Jesus, the way of Yahweh, in this broken and messed up world, is the world's not always going to be for us. And we got to understand that from the jump. And so once you understand that the world's not always going to be for you, and it's broken, and it's not always in the ways of God, the question you have to ask is, well, how do you respond? And a fear will arise within that, because we're immediately going to start noticing there's going to be some challenges to us operating as people who love Jesus and are following in his way and trying to become more like him day by day. There's going to be challenges to do that in this culture. And so the big fear is the majority culture is going to take what's most important to you. And for some people, that's going to be their family, that's going to be their job, their career, it's going to be their livelihood. The fear is that the majority culture, because we will not assimilate as Christians, as a minority culture, we will not fully adopt the Babylonian way, that Babylon, the world, is going to punish us for it, and it's going to start taking things from us. So what do we do? What do we do when that fear comes up? There's a few passages that I think help set a context for the frame of mind we need to be in. Philippians 1:21 is one of them. It says, "For me to live is Christ and to die is gain." We got to understand that living as Jesus did is better than anything this world has to offer. And if it costs us our life in the end, that it was worth it. Your life is not wasted because you got persecuted and it cost you something to live like Jesus did. It's worth your life is worthy, right? It's valuable. The second verse is Matthew 10:28. It says, "Don't fear those who kill the body, but are not able to kill the soul. Rather fear him who is able to destroy both soul and body in hell." Now, you could use that verse to really do some fear mongering, right? I don't think that's what that verse is trying to imply. I think that verse is supposed to put it into perspective who you should actually care about the opinion of, right? We can all fall victim to wanting the approval and the affirmation from the people around us. But at the end of the day, their opinions don't matter. They're not going to bed at night. They're not wrestling with the internal conflict of, did you stay true to yourself? Did you remain who you are under the conditions that pressurized you? And so for Daniel and his friends, they recognize, the Babylonians could kill us. This could cost us our life to stand on this conviction. But there's someone who has a power over our soul, who we really are. And I want to stay in line with him. I want to stay on good terms with him. In this conflict we experience in our context today, it's very critical to just remind yourself constantly, you don't live for people's acceptance. Lecrae has this line: if you don't live for people's acceptance, you'll die from their let me rephrase that. Lecrae has this line: if you live for people's acceptance, you'll die from their rejection. We can't live for people's acceptance, right? It feels good to be accepted by others. I get it. I love being. I need affirmation. I need people to tell me I'm doing a good job. But I can't live for that. That's going to kill me in the long term. And Daniel and his friends, I think they recognize that. So they're not looking for Babylonian acceptance. Instead, they're going to move forward by fully relying on God's acceptance throughout it, which is what you see showing up constantly, is God just giving them favor to keep moving forward, despite the most challenging circumstances. The last verse I want to read is John 10:17-18. It says, "This is why the Father loves me, because I lay my life down so that I may take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down on my own. I have the right to lay it down and I have the right to take it up again, and I have received this command from my Father." I think that's an important piece to this Jesus story, is Jesus willingly lays his life down for us. We all need to make this decision on, are we going to lay our lives down for the sake of the gospel? I don't think that's going to cost me my life in my lifetime. I could be wrong, right? Things could go completely opposite of how they are right now. But I just really doubt I'm going to have to face persecution in that type of way, to where I'm losing my life. But I think it's key to remember for all of us, as Christians, we all are making this choice. We're making this choice when we're getting baptized. We're publicly displaying that we're aligning with Jesus. And when you align with Jesus, what you're doing is you're signing up to lay your life down for the sake of the gospel, for the sake of building the kingdom. And it's not going to be easy. You're signing up for hard work. And Daniel and his friends signed up for hard work. They knew the repercussions. They're not going in blind. And so I think the challenge that we can take away from this section, before we keep diving into more and more in later episodes, is, have you really signed up for the way of Jesus in this world? Because it's going to cost you something. And if your response to it costing you something is, well, I'm just going to fight. I'm going to fight that. It costs me something. I don't want it. It should be easy to be a Christian. No one should be like stepping on my rights, yada, yada, yada. Jesus warned you that that's what you signed up for. So how about you learn to live faithfully under persecution, under scrutiny, and go from there and see how God uses your faithfulness in the midst of all that persecution and suffering for his glory in the building of his kingdom long term. That's it for this episode of the Freight Podcast. Thank you guys for listening. Keep tuning in as we're going to continue to dive through the book of Daniel. I'm not sure if I'm doing it every week, but we will do it consistently so you're not being left hanging for like 3 weeks or whatever. And we're going to continue our Hard Take series as well to just keep the juices flowing for this podcast. We finally got some consistency and a routine a little bit. And so hopefully this helps you on your journey to follow Jesus and to live in this world faithfully as a Christian. Subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening to. We have it on YouTube now, so go check it out on YouTube. We try to make it look a little bit more beautiful. Move the bookshelf so that you have something to look at in the background, with a Groot head and 2 Peter Pan movies. I can't make it. 2 Peter Pan movies on VHS tape. Freaking dope. Anyways, again, that's it for this episode of the Freight Podcast. Thank you for listening, and share it with your friend.